Hi, welcome back to the attic. I'm Chris Walls, and today I'm going to be presenting the second segment of the April 24th, 2004 musicianship workshop that Tony Rice gave at the Old Town School of Folk Music. And there'll be one more segment after today from the 2004 workshop, and then I've got some audio from a 2010 musicianship workshop that Tony Rice gave. And I'm going to go back and do a little editing and some EQing on those, and we'll be presenting those as well in upcoming installments of Music in the Attic. I sometimes get asked about this guitar, this Tony Rice model Santa Cruz guitar. Some people ask about the pickguard on this, and it's certainly not factory original, and it is indeed a real piece of tortoiseshell. It's very thin and very brittle, but it's on there good and solid, and it's and that's where it's going to stay. It's too thin to do anything else with. Can't make picks out of it or anything like that. And I get asked about it every now and again. And what's the story behind? How did I get a piece of tortoiseshell big enough, and how did I get it on there, and all that? And the story goes like this. There's a fella that I know here in Chicago, a man named Mike Lieber, who is a cultural anthropologist. He's since retired from doing that, and he used to teach at University of Illinois Chicago in their Chicago campus. And one time I was down there, I was visiting him in his office, and like all professors' offices, I imagine, it had a whole ton of bookshelves, and they were stuffed with books, and there was all manner of different things that he'd picked up from his travels as an anthropologist. And at one point, he walked over to one of the shelves and pulled a dusty piece of something out, and he turned to me and he said, "Can you use this? Would you like to have this?" And I said, "Mike, what is this?" And he says, it's a piece of tortoiseshell. And it was a very flat, very thin piece, very, very brittle. And I said, "Mike, where did you get this?" He said, that's a piece of the shell from the tortoise that was part of the feast of the celebration of the wedding that my wife and I had, where we married each other, on an island in Micronesia. They were married by a Micronesian chief, and he said that was the turtle that was part of the feast, and they saved part of the shell and they gave it to Mike. And I looked at amazement at this piece of shell, and I said, "Mike, I can't take this. This is from your wedding ceremony. I can't. This is a wonderful gift, but I can't accept it. This is yours." And Mike looked at me, I guess with the look that anybody would have who's been married a good number of years. He said, "I have Esther." That's his wife's name. He said, "I don't need this," and he handed me the piece of tortoiseshell, and I immediately thought I would love to have a pickguard made out of it, because it was really dry and thin and very flimsy and brittle, and it was not going to be good for doing really anything else. And so I took it up to the man that does my repair work on my guitars, a man named Jim Craig, at a place called Hog Eye Music up in Evanston. And I brought it up to him in like a paper sack, and I said, "Jim, would it be possible to pull the old pickguard off of the Santa Cruz, shape a pickguard out of the tortoiseshell, and apply it?" And he looked at it and he said, "Oh, I think there might be something I can do." And a few weeks later, he calls me. He says the guitar is ready, and so I go up and I pick it up, and I look and I see this magnificent work that he's done, all by hand to get it shaped just right, and then affixed to the top of the guitar. And I remember he had a smaller paper sack with the leftover chips of tortoise, and he handed it to me and he said, "I don't ever want to see this stuff again." And apparently the shell was so thin and so brittle it was impossible to work on using any kind of tools that that were powered by anything. He had to do everything by hand. So he took the old pickguard and he scored around it with a mat knife, and then very carefully broke the pieces off and then sanded around so there'd be no sharp edges, and then stuck it on the guitar. I think it's a marvelous story of the shell itself. It's a pretty neat story of Jim Craig and his ability to overcome the impossible task of taking a really dry, brittle piece of tortoiseshell and fashioning just a magnificent pickguard out of it. So yes, it's not factory original, but that's the story behind this pickguard. It is indeed a real piece of tortoiseshell, and I'm real happy and proud to have it. So let's get on to the audio part of the music in the attic here today. Tony, in this segment, takes a lot of questions from the audience, not too much prompting from me, gets into the whole idea behind playing rhythm and groove and what drives a bluegrass band. He talks about a little bit of the history of bluegrass and what is bluegrass itself. It's a really fascinating segment that runs about a half hour, and there'll be, like I say, one more segment after this on the next installment of Music in the Attic. So please enjoy Tony's wisdom for all of us from April 24th of 2004. And I'll see you back in the attic again.
I think probably the most fascinating aspect of your playing for me has always been the ability, particularly when I've seen you play live with a full band setting, to be able to play loud and stand out so well on a lead solo, a lead break, and yet maintain such incredible tone. Because a lot of guys, when they're out there playing and they're playing a lead break and they're leaning in their guitar to get the volume out, they lose the tone,
right.
And or the strings just the strings start to buzz because they're hitting it so hard.
Yeah,
One thing and another. I mean, what is it? Is there a technique? Is it the right hand? Is it your guitar setup that helps you?
Yeah, it's
achieve
both
that?
the guitar setup and the right hand pick angle that you change under those conditions. But you bring up a good point, because what happens is you remember those things you used to be able to get at the fair, those, what do they call them, a Chinese something where you put them on
Finger cuffs?
Yeah, right, exactly. And the harder you pull, of course, and you reach that point with your right hand technique that the harder you bash it, the less you get out of it.
Right.
I mean, a string will only vibrate in an arc so much, and then it will start to self-distort, and that's literally a correct term. It is distorting. It's
Right.
There's an interruption there of its natural vibration. If you hit it hard enough, the string will start to vibrate and throw out all kinds of weird, even in odd order harmonics, and the string just says, "Oh, I can't take this." But nonetheless, there's some people that keep pushing it, they'll push, and the harder they push, the less the volume they get out of it.
So again, you have to find that happy medium.
You got to find a happy medium, and it requires a couple of things that you can only learn through experience and trial and error, I think, or it was for me, because the reason I know that is because at one time I was naive enough to think that, yeah, the harder you play this damn thing, the more volume you're going to get out of it. It took me a while to figure out that that's not going to work. And so you start to experiment around with the right hand, and a lot of this is subconscious. Now you keep this in mind, There wasn't a time when I said, when I woke up one day, I said, okay, I'm going to tackle this problem. I'm learning to play this damn thing real hard. I want to play this thing as hard as J.D. Crowe plays a banjo or whatever. No, that didn't happen. I woke up one day and said, yeah, no matter what it takes, I'm going to do this. It was one of those things where I said, well, you know, priority one is the tone that comes out of this instrument. And whatever I have to do to retain that, that's priority one. And the volume, it was a subconscious thing of pick, angle, distance from the bridge to the sound hole, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Stiffness of the pick, the type of pick, the strain gauges. You know, there's a lot of factors involved in
Yeah, on the instrumental music, the acoustic music that you were involved in the late 70s into the 80s, I guess it was. When you were creating that, were you thinking melodically on it, or were you thinking chordally on it when you were writing the tunes?
Sometimes it was both. A lot of times a simple melody would come to mind, and I would play that or search around for it till I found it where I could memorize it. And then I would see what kind of chords would fit with that melody. And then sometimes it was just the opposite. It was a sequence of chord changes that I'd found through noodling that I thought were pleasant. And I thought, well, in order to make this a complete piece of music, it's got to have a melody. So both is the answer.
And a lot of the chords, you developed the chords through noodling, or did you actively seek out, certain chord shapes, or was it all noodling? I mean, we all noodle.
Okay. Example. Let's see if I can give you this. A friend of mine at the time was a notorious acoustic bass player in all forms of music, classical and jazz and fusion jazz, by the name of Buell Neidlinger. And Buell was acting as a tutor somewhere at the time. And he said, you know, man, what you can do, he says, I want you to try this. He says, I want you to try to play a whole bunch of different chords, and I want you to have an E note in all these chords. And the tune I'm referring to here was Swing 51.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I started playing all these different chord inversions to make sure that I had the same E note in every one of those chords, which is there. So anyway, I had a sequence of chords, and so I thought, well, this needs a melody. So I added the melody to the chords, and the tune ended up being Swing 51.
As a band leader, also during that same period, when you had your own band, the instrumental one, how much freedom did you give the other players to work with your melody, as opposed to how much control on the actual composition?
Oh, a lot. I don't know, I certainly wouldn't compare my own musicianship, the magnitude of my musicianship. I wouldn't compare it to Miles Davis, but the approach is very simple. Is that whoever I work with, I like for them to think for themselves and bring in whatever they want to play. And if they want to take a melody of mine and somehow alter that, I think that's good. I welcome them, and players do.
And again, along the same lines, when they alter a melody, one of your melodies, how often does your concept of the melody or change in your own playing? In other words, being influenced by the other players.
The interplay, yeah, it happens a lot. There's a couple of tunes I've written that I would play the same melody every time I played the tune, but somebody like Sam Bush would come along, and during the recording process, he would play the basic melody or imply the melody, but make a couple of minor changes. And then to me, those minor changes have became the standard. There's Another tune that comes to mind was a tune that I'd written called Devlin,
Yeah.
and David Grisman had, it's very, very slightly altered the original melody. So the original melody has been fed back to me as being the norm. Even though I wrote the composition, he changed it. Well, you know, now I perceive his change to be the norm. I hope that I hope that answers the question.
I want to get into some rhythm discussion. You have carved out an important role for yourself, not only as a lead player, but also as a rhythm player. I'd like you to tackle three issues: slow, medium, and fast. What is your approach to playing rhythm over a slower tune, like a ballad, a medium tune, like Blue Ridge Cabin Home, something like that, and then a faster tune, just a real breakdown? Because there obviously has to be three different sets of mechanics and three different mindsets to a certain degree.
Yes, there is. First off, let me see if I can explain this. My rhythm style and my whole entire rhythm approach is ensemble dependent. It is, I have never felt comfortable sitting down with a guitar and just playing rhythm with it. Although I did an album of tunes that way, and it was grueling to have to do that.
Church
But I
Street.
did a Church Street Blues.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to me, what I try to do, consciously try to do this, in ensemble playing, there's a pocket between the mandolin backbeat and the on-beat of the acoustic bass. And so what I try to do is tonally fill that void. Okay, that means constantly changing a rhythm pattern to fit the moment, or to fit the players or whoever it happens, you know, whoever I might happen to be playing with. And that applies to slow tunes or fast or whatever. It's a constantly changing thing. It's a very good question, because some people look at the role of a bluegrass rhythm guitar as being the locomotive of the band, and I don't perceive it that way. I don't at all. So, and in this process of being able to get between this mandolin offbeat and a bass onbeat and fill that hole in there. Well, there was another thing I discovered many years ago. As long as I'm doing that, as long as I'm not the person driving this band, then I have a certain amount of freedom to rhythmically use substitutions and counterpoint and different things that I use. And I use them without regard to whether the band will like them or not. I don't give a shit. So, but I hope that answers it. And it's a constantly changing thing. There's, I don't know if you took an instructional video of mine or something and were able to slow it down. You could probably find some pattern, but it wouldn't last very long. It would change. I mean, I rarely hold any rhythm pattern more than a few bars, if that. And I'll change to something else.
So you find that same kind of freedom, rhythmic freedom, given the band context of the bass and the mandolin.
Yes.
No matter what tempo.
Yeah. There's some ensembles that I play in. Just for example, with Sam Bush and Jerry Douglas and a real good bass player. This is something where, as a rhythm guitar player, I instantly go into autopilot the moment the tune is kicked off. It's like I don't have to really do anything. It's like there's some mystical power that takes over and enables me to just make what I perceive to be a contribution to the overall sound of the ensemble, as opposed to trying to drive it. Am I making sense here with this?
So is that advice that you would necessarily give to
Oh, I
guitar
would. I
players?
very much would. A bass player I worked with for many years used the best analogy of timing. in any music form that I've ever heard. And I don't know where he came up with this, but he said that he thinks of timing as being a hobo in a boxcar and a freight train moving at a constant velocity. Okay, well then, if that constant velocity represents metronomic time, you know, repetition, he says that he imagines himself as being the hobo in the boxcar, but he's able to move from one end of the boxcar to the other.
Nice.
And that says it all right there. You know? Because metronomic rhythm, I mean, what is the point in it? Music is supposed to breathe. I hate playing music by click tracks and, you know, artificial methods of time, because an analysis, and now they can do those analyses on any music form with a rhythm section. They can monitor each individual person's activity at the moment. And it's amazing to see this on a computer, how a bass player will hit a note, you know, a couple of milliseconds ahead of, you know, somebody else in the ensemble, and you'll see a staggered pattern here. But the listener still perceives this as a pulse that is pleasant. Right? But what makes it pleasant is that it does breathe, it varies, the tempo changes. You know, it's never the same. Tempo change. There's radical musicians. A banjo player named Bill Emerson is a real good example. It's amazing to play with Emerson, because here you have a piece of music going along at a fairly steady tempo, and Emerson will come in with this certain command of a tempo change that's really rather radical. And you got to be prepared for that. And I do, and I enjoy that. You know, and Sam Bush is the same way. He will play a solo with and from the moment that solo starts, there will be an abrupt change in the tempo that's not perceived by the listener, but the musician has to be aware that it's coming.
That's a really interesting point.
And to be able to respond to that.
If any of you happen to own the Manzanita album, and you recorded Blackberry Blossom on that record, the very last solo that you take follows David Grisman,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a perceptible. I mean, it's almost as though the tempo of the tune speeds up.
It does.
Well,
Yeah.
it may, but I think the illusion is that because Grisman is playing so much on the back of the beat, and when you come in, you're right on top or perhaps ahead of the beat,
Right.
that there's almost a perceptible lurch when your last guitar solo comes in, and it's like shifting to another gear.
I know what you're talking about. I think if you clock the front end of the tune and you clock the back end of the tune, it's probably going to be a radical difference. It's probably going to be faster at the back end of that tune. That's part of Grisman's musicianship, is that he's an aggressive enough player, and sometimes a little over energetic. He'll get into something, and you know, it will in fact pick up tempo a little bit, which is, in the case of Blackberry Blossom, I think that's what happened. By the time we got to the end of it, I thought, man, this guy, this dude has really got this thing fine, you know. All of a sudden, how am I going to cope with this? So it came back to me again, and I tried to reach that compromise of having the piece of music retain its its overall timing integrity, and at the same time pull it back down very gradually to the point where I can play the damn thing. Close it out. So,
You brought up a point earlier, and maybe this will be just a little side issue. You mentioned Church Street Blues as being grueling in terms of having to play solo and rhythm and cover all the bases just by yourself.
Right.
The other side of the coin, I use that as an example in class as being the most complete form of playing for someone who's doing it just by themselves. And I wonder if you can maybe talk a little bit about what that experience is like of just having to do it all with just one solo guitar.
What made it complicated was, it's like in ensemble playing, when somebody kicks off a tune, there's a clock that starts running in your head. Can you follow me on that? It's there whether you know it or not. There's a pulse there, an implied pulse. And it's back to the thing of my role as an ensemble player versus being someone who doesn't pay that much attention to how that internal clock versus the mechanics of playing rhythm. I don't equate those two things. And if I do, it's in a very unique way. So when I was faced with having to do Church Street Blues, I had the internal clock running, like on the tune Church Street Blues. As soon as I kicked it off, the clock started. But it's like, this is very foreign to me to have to do this without supporting players. And the only thing I got to support it with is the voice, or was the voice at the time. And so I haven't heard that in so long, I don't even know what you're talking about.
But as playing, for example, you play tunes like Shenandoah and Danny Boy as solos,
Right.
with no rhythm accompaniment.
Right.
Can you maybe address some of that in terms of how you approach a completely solo guitar?
Yeah, you know what? I hope to do an album of ballads. It would be the next thing I want to tackle. Something I've wanted to do for 20 years. I've procrastinated on it, but I do want to do it. And Shenandoah and Danny Boy are good examples because I learned this. This is my jazz influence from a lot of players. Is that people like Oscar Peterson and horn players, and maybe the first person that comes to mind would be the pianist Bill Evans. Well, these people will begin long solo sections of tunes in free time. They will play whatever comes to mind without regard to a pulse. And when I started to learn the version of Shenandoah that I play, well, then that was the approach I used. Okay, well, I don't want a clock running in this tune. Nowhere. And that I wanted to have that freedom to be able to sustain a note or a chord as long as I want to do it for the effect. I hope that answer the question.
Yeah.
Is there a clock here?
Yes.
That you're following?
Yeah. Oh, you mean during like the Shenandoah?
Right.
No, that clock does not exist then. It's not even there.
No, I didn't mean the repetitive clock. I meant the clock that the beat, the song itself is following. That's.
The only thing, it's real, at that point, the beat structure is real convoluted. It's like, I may play for one bar, I might play what could be perceived as timing, and it radically slow it down during the next measure. Or speed it back up a little bit for the next, or the next sequence of chords I might run in time, or with the clock. And in other words, I deliberately try not to pattern this so that it's perceived as having a pulse. I don't want the listener to perceive that tune as having a pulse to it. A pulse would screw it up. The intent is to try to get the listener to hopefully enjoy some of the chord substitutions and different patterns that I'm playing around the melody of that simple tune. It's for effect that I do that I ignore the clock.
What I meant was the what you are following is something that's coming out of your head. It's not anything
Right.
external or anything anybody could point to. It's just all here. It's my heart.
It's during the moment, yeah, that's right, it's the soul. Yeah, right, exactly.
I played, for years, I was a finger picking guitar player, and got pretty good at it, enjoyed it, and then I started playing, about a year and a half ago, I started playing the flat pick. It was a new thing to me, and it's, I've never enjoyed playing the guitar so much, really, as I started learning flat pick. I was wondering if you could answer kind of a technical question about like when I'm playing like a fast break in a song, I find that my pick kind of gets on the wrong side of the string, and I have to move that pick over the string to get to the.
Welcome to the club. Yeah, I know it's a frustrating thing. It's frustrating for me every time I get on that stage.
Is that something that I just have to learn to deal with, or because it seems like sometimes I can go through it slowly and I can work out the picking part so that I end up in the right place, but
Right,
sometimes it just doesn't work out.
To answer the question, you don't have to learn how to deal with it, but you'd probably be better off if you did, because you'll be repeating yourself if you were to start to adhere to a particular pattern of up, down, up, down, up, down. To do that, well, then you're restricting yourself to repetition.
Oh, so a break should maybe be.
Yeah, but it can be frustrating.
Very
You know,
odds of that.
it's like I'll be playing a solo, and all of a sudden I'll think, oh yeah, this is going pretty good, man. I'm really on a roll here. I can do no wrong now, and then lo and behold, it'll come that millisecond where the pick was supposed to be going down, but I can't do two down strokes that fast, so I got to do an up. And I've just screwed up the whole cycle that I'm involved in trying to execute this arpeggio, right?
Yeah.
And then you start to resort to tricks of how do you get yourself out of that. You know, you've painted yourself into a corner. How do you do that? Pull-offs and hammer-ons work real good. A lot of guys say, boy, Mr. Price, I love the way you do those hammer-ons and pull-offs. I think to myself, you know, I really don't want to be doing them.
You talked earlier about not wanting to drive music in ensemble playing as a guitar player. Do you think that is there an instrument in the band that should drive it, or do you find that in an ensemble there really isn't anyone in particular who drives it, but collectively you find the pulse to drive it?
Yeah, that right, collectively would be, I mean, that's when it's the most enjoyable for me to be doing that, is when, it's back to the question Chris asked a while ago about working with other musicians, and is there certain requirements that one musician will have over another one, or certain expectations? No, the answer to the question, you get the right combination of guys together and they trust each other. And they know that once the tune is kicked off, the internal clock in the head is running. And that, you know, each musician is free to vary that any way that they want to, with the notion that what you're trying to achieve here is an implied pulse for the listener, right? You got that, you know, because that's what you want to do. You want to hear them. I mean, that's why we're doing this, right? It's a primitive thing. You know, it goes back to somebody beating on a rock, but it's there. And nonetheless, but there are bands, believe it or not, the world is full of them, where everybody in this ensemble thinks that, well, it's my job to keep this rhythm pattern as metronomic as I can do it. And, you know, there's 5 people in this band, and, you know, the chick playing the bass, well, it ain't her fault. You know, the guy playing the mandolin, well, I know it ain't his fault, but boy, this guy playing some other instrument over here, you know, we're all the rest of us have got this right on the beat, and, you know, and there's this one person in his band that's screwing this whole thing up because they're dragging, you know. And some of those frustrations, they're comical to me whenever we encounter those. Because I think to myself, look, all you people got to do is just lay back and forget about this. Forget about trying to play this pulse. Just go with it in your head. Yeah,
Yeah, Kelly.
I wanted to ask you, as someone who's torn down walls in some different genres, I know I've heard since I was a kid the phrase, that ain't bluegrass, you know?
Right.
It's not hard to find in the world of jazz, that ain't jazz.
right.
And I'm just interested in maybe how you think about those walls. Which ones are weight bearing, which ones you tear down, maybe how your thinking has evolved
Right.
about that over time.
I don't know. I don't dwell on that as much as most other people do. But I can tell you this, I don't think there has been any music form since the beginning of time that hasn't been allowed to flourish to some degree. If it doesn't, it's going to be stale. And even, so you say even in the classical world, chamber music, for example, there's kind of a protocol that you play this piece of music exactly as written and in the same key, you know, a simple string quartet. But then along comes somebody really unique that as individuals they and as a collectively they decide to add something different to this piece of music, you know, be it a Mozart string quartet or whatever, and you can hear that, and the instrument, there's been an evolution of the instrument itself, and the way the instruments are set up and how they play them. Back to your original statement about, well, that's not bluegrass. Well, okay, if you ask Bill Monroe what is bluegrass, he don't know what the hell it is. He has no way of knowing what the hell it is. You think about it, Bill Monroe, this is written on his own Manlin case as bluegrass music since 1923. Well, there's quite a few of us in this audience that once you hear the word bluegrass, you think of a 5-piece band and you have a preconceived notion of what that sounds like to some degree, right? Well, how did that happen? Because in 1923, that didn't exist. But along came this guy named Earl Scruggs. They come in and added this whole different sound to this ensemble. He single-handedly changed the sound. So what would have happened back then? And what did happen was you had a few diehards back then that were so used to what Monroe was calling bluegrass back then, which was himself in string bean playing a flat pick style 5-string banjo, right? And no dobro, of course. That was called bluegrass. So back when Earl Scruggs hit the Grand Ole Opry with Bill Monroe in 1945, you had just as many people back then per capita saying, that ain't bluegrass. You know, you following me on this, right? And when Coltrane and you know, hit the small ensemble modern jazz world, well, then you had the critics screaming how radical he was, and God forbid that, you know, Ornette Coleman's and Albert Eilers came along and then saying, well, that ain't jazz. You know?
I heard David Grisman one time sum it up so well. He said, all tradition begins as heresy.
Yeah, well, very well put. I mean, that's Grisman. He has a degree in English literature, so he can. Yeah.
Somebody maybe you had,
Yeah, I'm constantly striving for better clarity with flat picking and cross picking and suggestions.
Clarity. Okay, when you say clarity, that's real vague. First off, let me ask you something. When you say clarity, do you mean for yourself or do you mean for the listener, or both?
Well, both.
Okay.
Bringing out the notes, especially on a run, or if I'm bringing, you know, where things start to muddy up.
Right, gotcha. clarity, one of the easiest way to obtain clarity on a fretted string instrument is just simply strike the string closer to the bridge. That will instantly get you clarity. And it might also instantly make you sound like shit. So it's kind of a juggling act, you know, of projection. I mean, when you say clarity, you could be thinking, well, you know, I'm playing in this band and I want to be able to be heard a little louder. Is that one of the things you're thinking?
Yeah, just, you know, note to note, especially fast, quick picking, flat picking things. Just, you have a really good ability of bringing out where you hear every note and everything's coming out.
Well, there's a lot of that depends on the band. For example, the weakest lead instrument in a bluegrass band is the acoustic guitar. By a million miles, it's the weakest instrument. It does not have the cutting power of a bass or a mandolin or a fiddle, and God forbid a banjo. It just does not. It's miles below in intensity. And I fought with that for a long time. Well, I shouldn't say a long time, but I fought with it for a while. And then at some point I started to listen to why a guy like Vassar Clements could play at a tenth of the intensity of his fellow fiddle players and be heard. And you know why that is? It's because what he had to offer was so unique that even the band wanted to hear what he was doing. I hope that offers some. Because I always tell when I ain't on, and especially in an ensemble situation, because they start playing louder.